Who deserves the Nobel Peace Prize? The winner of one of the world's most prestigious awards is often controversial. The 1991 recipient, Aung San Suu Kyi, is being criticised for ignoring the plight of the Rohingya minority in Myanmar. As this year's nominees are announced, who are the other questionable winners from the past? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finighan. It's anyone's guess as to who will win this year's Nobel Peace Prize. No less than 318 people and organisations are nominated, and the announcement's due on October 6th. The nominations are supposed to be secret, but on the list are expected to be the White Helmets, search and rescuers in Syria, Pope Francis and Donald Trump. Previous winners have been controversial, including Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama, Vietnam War diplomat and former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, and now Aung San Suu Kyi. Fleur Lansbach reports.
A Nobel Peace Prize winner's silence on the military crackdown of the Rohingya in Myanmar. Aung San Suu Kyi is under international pressure, as hundreds of thousands of the long-persecuted Rohingya steamed into Bangladesh. They told horrific stories. Their villages burned, women raped, and children killed. Landmines, another danger as they crossed the border. United Nations Secretary General calls the crisis a textbook example of ethnic cleansing.
Do you believe this is ethnic cleansing?
Well, I would answer your question with another question. When 1/3 of the Rohingya population had to flee the country, can you find a better word to describe it?
As Aung San Suu Kyi is urged to take strong stand on behalf of the Rohingya, critics are asking whether her Peace Prize can be revoked. The Nobel Committee in Norway is no stranger to controversy or pressure. Throughout the prize's 116-year history, many winners have been accused of not deserving the honor. In 2012, the European Union received the prize for helping transform Europe from a continent of war into a continent of peace during one of the worst financial crises. Barack Obama was chosen for what was described as extraordinary efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between people. But that nomination came just 12 days after he was inaugurated as US president.
He offered Europe.
In 1973, former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger was seen as the most controversial for winning the prize for peace work in South Vietnam, while North Vietnam invaded South Vietnam just 2 years later. Kissinger was also accused of war crimes for his alleged role in America's secret bombing of Cambodia between 1969 and 1975. It's often debated who's worthy of the $1 million prize. Even its founder was a controversial figure. Alfred Nobel made his fortune after inventing dynamite and other powerful explosives. But it's thought that's not what he wanted to be remembered for. Fleur Lansbach, Al Jazeera.
So what did Alfred Nobel hope that his legacy would be? Well, when he died in 1896, his will said the entire remaining estate should be used to endow prizes to those who, during the preceding year, shall have conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. Well, 2 fellow Nobel laureates are urging Aung San Suu Kyi to help the Rohingya. Malala Yousafzai, who won 3 years ago for her girls' education campaign against the Taliban, wrote recently on Twitter, "Over the last several years, I have repeatedly condemned this tragic and shameful treatment. I'm still waiting for my fellow Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi to do the same. The world is waiting, and the Rohingya Muslims are waiting." Desmond Tutu, who won the prize in 1984 for helping to end apartheid in South Africa, wrote an open letter to Suu Kyi. "If the political price of your ascension to the highest office in Myanmar is your silence, the price is surely too steep," the former church leader said. So let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. Joining us from the Norwegian capital, Oslo, is Fredrik Heffermehl, author of Nobel Peace Prize, What Nobel Really Wanted. From Bexhill-on-Sea in the UK, journalist Rohan Jayasekera, who specialises on the Nobel Peace Prize awards. And from Chicago, Azim Ibrahim, senior fellow at the Centre for Global Policy. I'm going to start with you, Azim. I don't want to get too bogged down with Aung San Suu Kyi in this programme. I want to concentrate more on the Nobel Peace Prizes in their totality. But in her Nobel lecture, Aung San Suu Kyi said, "Wherever suffering is ignored, there will be the seeds of conflict, for suffering degrades and embitters and enrages." What then are we make of her silence over the treatment of the Rohingya? Should her Peace Prize be revoked?
Well, the Club of the Nobel Laureates is the most exclusive club in the world. And unlike the other Nobel Prizes, the prize for physics or chemistry, when you discover a particular particle like the Higgs or a strand of protein, where only a small number of exclusive people can really appreciate the magnitude of that discovery, the Nobel Peace Prize has always been very controversial. Aung San Suu Kyi was awarded her prize, after 15 years of house arrest, after immense sacrifice that she undertook. It's my understanding that the Nobel Committee only awards the prizes for past achievements, not for current or future achievements. So in that case, I believe she is very deserving of that prize. However, we've also now seen an unprecedented situation in which we have a dozen other Nobel laureates criticising her for her lack of inaction on the Rohingya ethnic cleansing that's going on in her country. And it's not the fact that she has any significant power in the country, she doesn't control the military, but her complete indifference to the suffering of the Rohingya. We have a situation in which over 409,000 people have been ethnically cleansed from their villages in Myanmar and driven over the border. And a most recent estimate actually indicates that over 1 million of the Rohingya will be ethnically cleansed by the end of the year. This is unprecedented. And for her then to turn around and say, well, there's no ethnic cleansing going on in this country, and this is all just a big iceberg of misinformation and fake news. And I think this is very difficult for many people who are very strong supporters of her, people like myself, to actually absorb.
Rohan Jayasekera, what do you make of what you just heard there? Is Aung San Suu Kyi a deserving recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize?
I think she was a deserving recipient of the Peace Prize when she got it 26 years ago. But also, a lot can happen in a week in politics. 26 years is even more so, and the country is completely transformed. So it's a political situation. That's not to excuse her response or lack of it. I think that she should definitely step up, not only on behalf of the Rohingyas, but for the people of Myanmar as a whole, who simply deserves better in terms of an inspiration for the future than they're actually getting from Aung San Suu Kyi.
Fredrik, Heffermehl, I welcome your thoughts on Aung San Suu Kyi, but I want to ask you if you think Peace Prize recipients who later violate the principles for which they were recognised should have their awards revoked or rescinded. Should the Nobel Committee retain responsibility for the prizes that it awards and hold recipients to the highest standards in their future lives, as well as honouring past achievements?
No, I think the committee is completely right in not going into the later mischief of recipients. That would be an impossible situation. I agree that many should have their prizes revoked, and for instance, in particular, Dr. Kissinger, but this is not the practice. But you started out with a fairly vague, the question whether the recipient is worthy of the prize, that depends, because this is a legal instrument. It also has to be treated like that, and it has to be interpreted in, and the idea of interpretation is to find the intention of the testator when he made the testament. In this case, what went on in the mind of Alfred Nobel in November 1895 when he signed the bill. And there can be no question that he had a certain special idea of what he wanted to reward. He did not write a prize for peace. He said a prize for the champions of peace. And when he said that, he had in mind those working for a completely different world order where countries cooperate instead of arms races, military alliances, and military power games. The only security for mankind and also the only way to prosperity is to cooperate to develop international law and institutions, and to reduce and finally abolish armaments.
Okay, so Mr. Heffermehl, you're saying that the Nobel Committee, as far as you're concerned, isn't accurately honouring Nobel's wishes.
The Nobel Peace Prize hasn't existed. It is completely the Norwegian Parliament and the Norwegian politicians have betrayed the trust of Alfred Nobel for decades or for almost a century.
Azim Ibrahim, given the controversy that often surrounds it, why do you think the Nobel Peace Prize is such a big deal?
Well, it is the most exclusive club in the world, to be a Nobel laureate, and it's always going to run into controversy. I think your guest is right in that if the committee actually had a mechanism by which to revoke the prize after anybody's mischief behaviour, there'll be no end to revoking prizes. This is something I don't think is feasible or practical. Prizes are given for past achievements. I think the only exception to that rule is probably President Obama, who seems to have received this prize for simply not being President George Bush. He didn't actually have much past achievement and much significance. But this idea that prizes should be revoked or because of controversy, essentially, I think every single Nobel recipient would be under some sort of scrutiny and some sort of protest continuously, and we will never see an end to it.
Rohan Jayasekera, what's wrong then with the way in which the Nobel Committee is choosing recipients? Is it too political?
It's too political. Perhaps it's too private, not transparent enough. I mean, as best as we understand it, it's a group of extremely well-informed and distinguished Norwegians with support and advice from others. But it's not a process that seems to be open to any kind of internal review or internal improvement. I mean, it's a process that seems, by the sound of things, well overdue for some kind of reform, but it's hard to see how such a reform could be instituted.
And what do you feel, Rohan, about whether the Nobel Committee is accurately honouring Nobel's wishes or not?
Well, if you actually look go through the past, I mean, the sheer diversity of prize winners over the decades is really quite striking, and there have been plenty of examples of peace prizes that have been given. I mean, you think of the Locarno Treaty and the Kellogg-Briand peace treaties pacts in 1920s. I mean, that preceded the Second World War, and it was quite clearly a pointless exercise in retrospect. But whether we're talking about people, we're talking about treaty organizers or diplomats or individuals, I think that the prize works best when it highlights the work of individuals like Malala Yousafzai, you mentioned, and people like Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Leymah Gbowee, Tawakkol Kamal from Yemen, who won the awards. These are people who are generally inspirational for the work they've done in the past. And I think that's probably, for me anyway, closer to the wishes and the intentions of Alfred Nobel, as best I understand them, than people like Barack Obama.
Fredrik Heffermehl, do you think that the committee realises, or at least internally accepts, that it sometimes gets it wrong? In his memoir, the non-voting former secretary of the committee, Geir Lundstad, said that he regrets, in particular, Barack Obama's award in 2009, as it failed to achieve what the committee hoped it would. Do you think there is a recognition, at least privately among the committee, that they sometimes do get it wrong?
Well, they have been given, through my books 10 years ago, very clear analysis of what the prize was intended to achieve. And all this discussion, whether it was more or less right and whether they are in the spirit of Nobel, etc., they have very clear information that the point of departure is the idea that Nobel had in 1895, which is more relevant and urgent today than any time before. And they have chosen to completely neglect and obstruct any discussion of the idea of Nobel. And I can very well understand why they do that, because if they did so, they would have to realize that most of the prizes have been for other purposes than the one Nobel had in mind. And they can go on for 300 years and really do nothing for important to change more fundamental circumstances. And that was, Nobel had a very specific idea, and they don't want to hear of it. The committee is composed of people who have a very different approach and thinking of the one Nobel had in mind. And they try to keep this whole procedure secret and work in secrecy. And when we found out that there is no way to have a discussion as long as they hide behind the secrecy, we have really now published all known nominations that are in keeping with the intention of Nobel. So, but it's also the control of media is so strong that the fact that the process is no longer secret is also a secret. But anyone can find the actual candidates for this year, 2017, 34 persons on nobelwill.org, on our website, the Nobel Peace Prize Watch website. There you have those who are relevant and qualified. Okay. And that is, those persons should be discussed.
Azim, should the Nobel, do you agree that the Nobel Committee should be much more transparent in how it actually comes to choose the recipients of the Peace Prize?
Oh, no doubt it should be completely transparent in terms of which mechanism they're actually using, who are the recipients, and which way of actually measuring the Peace Prize, the recipients' actual achievements, the mechanism by which they're actually measuring it should be clearly stated, so that people can actually see for themselves whether these people are deserving or not, so as to avoid controversy in the future. I think the difficulty with the prize, with many people who have received it, particularly Aung San Suu Kyi, is that she has now transitioned from being a peace campaigner to a full-time politician, and she is now making her political calculations according to the sacrifices that she has made. She is now in a position in which she has spent and sacrificed a considerable amount to get to, and she is unwilling to give that up to speak up for the Rohingya minority being persecuted in her country. So it's purely a political calculation, and this is something that the Nobel Committee could not have possibly foreseen.
Rohan, the Nobel Committee overlooks many people whose actions appear to fit with Alfred Nobel's true intentions. Mm-hmm. Why is that? And can they do anything about it? Is there any comeback?
Well, I think, it's, to be honest, in some ways it's a little like the Oscars. The films that you like win, you're happy. The films that you don't like, you're unhappy. I love Moonlight, didn't care for some of the other films. But I think that I think we have to go back to the idea of the process being more transparent. I think also it might help to revisit the rule that prohibits the giving of the award to posthumously. I think that there are very many people who, and this goes back to the idea of the award being an endowment, that if you took the memory of somebody and looked at the work of somebody who'd passed away maybe that year and use that endowment to fund an endowment to continue that person's work, I think that might be a little bit more constructive use of the award. And to be absolutely honest, it would reduce the chances of a person changing from a freedom fighter 26 years later into somebody perhaps quite much less deserving of an award.
Fredrik Heffermehl, do you agree with that?
Well, I have considered that question, and I have a solution to this, which I will launch in my coming book.
You're not going to let us into just a hint of what it might be?
I'll reserve that for the readers.
OK, well, we'll look forward to it. Azim Ibrahim, There's no other award to which so much honour and importance is attached, and the Nobel Committee does not represent a truly global organisation. Is it time, do you think, for someone like the United Nations to come up with a new, truly global peace award that comes with much less controversy and more transparency?
I think any award of this kind of nature, irrespective of whether it comes from individuals appointed by the Norwegian Parliament or the United Nations or elsewhere, will come into immense controversy simply because on each side there's going to be different people who have very different interpretations of that individual. I don't think you can find a single Nobel laureate who everybody could agree with unanimously is highly deserving. You know, some of the people or recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize have been hugely controversial. And as my understanding, in 1994, a Nobel committee member actually resigned over the prize being given to Yasser Arafat and went on record calling him a terrorist. So this is always going to be under, huge scrutiny, right. And people who have been victims in conflicts and other ethnic cleansing, irrespective of what that person's achievements may have come to at the end. There'll always be controversy surrounding it. All right.
When I put that question to Azim, I saw Rohan shaking his head and Fredrik nodding in agreement. Rohan, you disagree with that?
Could I come in here?
Hang on a second, Fredrik. We'll come to you in just a moment. Let me hear from Rohan.
I think what I was shaking my head about was the idea of the United Nations being involved. I can't think of anything more likely to politicize the entire process than having the United Nations involved. You've seen the way that the Chinese have reacted to candidates that laureates that they politically object to. I'm sure the Russians will do the same. I think there'll be plenty of cases when Americans will do, and Britons and anybody involved in the.
Okay, but what about the principle that there should be some global peace award that isn't run by the Nobel Committee then?
No, I don't. Who would you replace it with? I mean, it would be a different selection of erudite men in a different room discussing different set of candidates. I think that the question is reform the Nobel Peace Prize process as it is now, rather than trying to fix something that's either going to be better or different to it.
All right, Fredrik Heffermehl.
Yeah, I think all these problems would disappear if the Norwegian Nobel Committee started to take an interest in what Nobel actually wanted and made the prizes were given on that basis for this idea. It would be embraced by the whole world. The whole point of the prize, to understand it, is that Alfred Nobel, he worked and lived all over the world, and he had a global perspective, not of what was good for each separate country, but what was the best solution for the world as a whole. And there are people in the world today who are working across all barriers, all differences in religion, political system, and all kinds of race and belief. That are the NGOs who are working around the UN system and are trying to promote the common interest of humanity. And if once you take that perspective of the Nobel Peace Prize, it will be very possible for all citizens of this world to understand that this is the way to security and prosperity.
All right, gentlemen, there we must end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us. Fredrik Heffermehl in Oslo, Rohan Jayasekera, who's in Bexhill, and from Chicago, Azim Ibrahim. Thank you for watching the programme. Don't forget you can see Inside Story again at any time just by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter, our handle at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian, Finighan, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.